Talking today with Seymour Harkema of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, Mr. Harkema, can you begin with some background on yourself? Where and when were you born?
I was born in 1930 in Grand Rapids, Michigan, southeast Grand Rapids. And I had a father who was a shoe repairman. And I did some repair work on shoes when I was 11 years old for him.
Okay.
Because people were getting their shoes repaired. They weren't buying new shoes at that time.
Now, you were pretty young, born in 1930, but do you have much recollection of how steady your father's work was in the 30s? I mean, was it kind of hard getting by, or did he have enough work?
Well, he had his problems during the Depression.
Mm-hmm.
He owned a number of houses and lost all of them during the Depression. So, yeah, he had a hard life, although I didn't really witness that much of it.
Okay. Now, did you have older brothers and sisters, or were you the oldest?
I was the youngest,
Mm-hmm.
and my youngest brother was 7 years older than I am.
Okay.
And then my oldest brother was old enough to be my dad.
Mm-hmm.
So
all right.
I didn't really get to know my oldest brother because he went off to college, went to Duke University and got his doctorate degree there. And
Mm-hmm.
so he was gone by the time I had recollection of what was going on.
Right. Okay. Now, do you remember much about what was going on during World War II? I mean, how much did you follow that when you were a kid?
Oh, I had a scrapbook. All the planes and all the equipment. What I remember having a scrapbook, but I don't have it anymore.
Okay. Now, at that age, you're going to be in your early teens. Did you figure that sooner or later you were going to go in the service?
No, four of my brothers were in the service,
Mm-hmm.
and they always said, "Don't go in the service." Well, things, of course, materialized, and I got caught up in it.
Right. Now, when did you graduate from high school?
Yeah,
Okay. What year did you graduate?
graduated from Christian High in 1948.
Okay. And what did you do after you finished high school?
Went to Calvin College, and I spent 3 years at Calvin College before I went in the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, I went in the Air Force, and that changed my whole outlook on life.
All right. Now, why did you join the Air Force?
I joined the Air Force because I knew I was going to be drafted, and I didn't want to be drafted into the Army.
Okay. Now, did you have a college deferment at the time and while you were at Calvin?
No, I did not have college deferments. If I would have had college deferments, I would have taken advantage of it.
All right. Well, no, at that point in time, this is like 1950, 51, was there a college deferment? I mean, if you were there full time,
I think college deferments started a month after I joined.
okay. All right.
January of 51.
All right. So at that point, you figure it was just a matter of time before they caught up to you, and it was probably going to be the Army. So,
Yeah,
okay.
that's right. Yeah.
All right. Now, you're enlisting, and you've got some college with you. Did that put you in a position where you could pick a little bit what kind of training you got or anything like that?
Oh yeah, it was quite an advantage for me that I had college.
Okay. Well, tell me just a little bit about the enlistment process. I guess first of all, why the Air Force rather than the Navy or something else?
Well, I don't know all of the details, but I did research all of the different branches of the service before I decided that the Air Force is where I wanted to go. But
Okay.
I guess one of the things was I figured I'd always have a roof over my head in the Air Force.
Right. Okay. So you pick that, and then you go and talk to the recruiters, and what kind of package did they give you, or what promises did they make to you?
I don't really remember any of that from the recruiters.
Mm-hmm.
I guess there was that, but I don't remember what it was.
That's fine. All right. So when did you actually enlist?
In December of 1950.
Okay. And when did you actually have to report for training?
They let me be home for Christmas. So the day after Christmas, I left for Detroit on the train, and that's where I actually was sworn in, was in Detroit.
Okay. And then from there, where do you go for training?
Went to Lackland Air Force Base for just a week or two, and then Sheppard Air Force Base in Texas.
Okay. And is Sheppard, and Lackland is in San Antonio. Is Sheppard in the same area, or is that somewhere else in Texas?
Sheppard is north of San Antonio, and I don't remember what the name of the city was there.
Okay.
But it was in the Panhandle of
All right.
Texas.
Okay, so that's if it's in the Panhandle, then it's some ways away from San Antonio at that point. All right, but that people can look up. Okay, but you're at Sheppard now. Well, when you were at Lackland, was that just processing? That you just kind of stand around?
Yeah, that's pretty much. At least I was in the barracks, and a lot of the people who came in after I did were in tents.
Okay.
So I had that advantage.
All right. And then when they send you up to Sheppard, what did the training up there consist of?
It was basic training. And sometimes the basic training was longer than others. And I didn't spend a lot of time in basic training.
About how many weeks do you think?
Probably a month or so.
Okay. And now a lot of people today have never been in basic training and don't even know what goes on there. So what do they make you do?
A lot of marching, but I don't really remember. Well, taking orders, I guess that was probably the main thing.
Mm-hmm. And did they try to teach you a little bit about the Air Force, and was there classroom stuff that was part of it?
I really don't remember that aspect of it.
Okay. Do you remember much emphasis on sort of the spit and polish stuff, keeping your uniform together?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I had to make sure that your bed was made up properly every day, and they inspected it, and if it wasn't to their standard, why, you'd get reprimanded for it.
All right. And then what kind of punishment do they have for that sort of thing?
Oh, I remember one time when I messed up, and they made me wash the barrack steps with a toothbrush. So will always stand in my head,
Right.
I'm sure.
Okay. Was that sort of thing fairly common? Sort of
Yeah.
that kind of thing? All right. And what kind of guys were you training alongside? Or were they from all over the country, or mostly one area? Or
Well, I had one buddy of mine at Calvin that was in the same flight that
Mhm.
I was in, but I guess everybody else was from different places. I don't really remember where they were all from.
Okay. Now, in the different stages here, whether it was before you go in, or in Detroit, or San Antonio, or wherever, did they have you take a bunch of tests and things to figure out what you might do or were good at?
Yeah, I remember going through testing, and that helped me after basic training. There wasn't many from our flight who got to go to a tech school.
Okay.
I think
So,
two of us did, and my buddy and I were those two.
all right. Okay. So what tech school did you go to then? Or where was it?
Electronics school at Keesler Air Force Base.
Okay. And where is Keesler Air Force Base?
It's in Biloxi, Mississippi.
All right. And then what was it like down there, just physically? What kind of living conditions did you have? Or
Well, it was good living conditions. Had a lot of good times there.
okay.
Yeah.
It would have been hot though, at least some of the time.
Yeah, I went there, I guess, probably it was in February
Yeah.
that I went there.
Okay. And how long was the training school there?
I think I was in training there until October.
Okay, so you're there through the summer. All right. Now it's tech school, but there's a lot of kinds of tech school. What were you learning there?
It was basic electronics testing, or
Hmm.
education, I should say.
Okay.
And,
And do you have a sense of what kind of balance there was between classroom work and actual hands-on work?
mostly classroom. And I had quite a bit of what we were being taught there already at Calvin, so it was kind of boring when I first got started because most of what it was repetition for
Yeah.
me.
So it's pretty basic science initially, just
Yeah.
what is electricity and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. All right. And then was this going to prepare you to work in pretty much any kind of system or that the Air Force had?
After I completed that basic electronics training, then I went to Denver, Lowry Air Force Base, and went to specialist school on gun bomb rocket site.
Okay. And to kind of go back to Biloxi, you're there for quite a while. Yeah, you're down in the South, and it's the early 50s. I mean, were you aware that the culture there was different from what you grew up with?
Oh yeah, I recognized that quite a bit when I was there. But I got around quite a bit. We got to New Orleans and different places.
Okay. Now, did you have any black servicemen training along with you or on the base, or?
I really don't remember.
Okay. Because you're in a segregated society down there, but the
Yeah,
Air Force in principle was desegregated by that time, or
Yeah,
kind of getting that way. But it just that part wasn't registering with you that much.
apparently not,
Okay.
because I don't recall that.
All right. Did you notice sort of the off the base in Mississippi or Louisiana? I mean, did you notice the kind of the segregation or the?
I don't remember at that time that I was all that conscious of it.
Okay. All right. And then, and I guess the people that you were training with, were these mostly guys who had some college background, or did you have a lot of kids and you were ahead of them, or what was the deal?
Well, I think we were all pretty much the same age,
Mhm.
and I'm sure they all had different backgrounds, but I don't remember those particular details relevant to that.
But you did mention that a lot of what you were getting in the school was stuff that you already knew. Did you have a sense that a lot of the other guys were in the same situation, or were you ahead of most of them?
I was ahead of most of
Okay.
them.
All right. So you work your way through the tech school, and so far it's sort of just general electronics training. And then you go on to Lowry, and I'll talk a little bit more about what you're doing there.
Well, I went to specialist school in Lowry. I think that was probably 6 or 8 weeks
Mhm.
specialist training. And then I became an instructor in that same school.
Okay. Now, were you still teaching just electronics, or had it gotten more focused now?
It was focused on the gun bomb rocket sites on the fighter aircraft.
Okay. And any fighter aircraft in particular, or all of them?
Well, the system that I was being taught about, and which I later taught, was mainly for the F-84 and the F-86.
Okay. For people who don't know, what were those aircraft?
They were fighter jets.
Okay.
And
And were these about the first really functional jet fighters that we had, or? I
well,
think there was-
they were relatively new at that
Yeah.
time. Prior to the F-86, the F-80 was the
Mhm.
main plane
Okay.
fighter.
And because this is going on during the Korean War, and jet aircraft were becoming increasingly important because at a certain point the Soviets were actually getting directly involved, although disguising themselves as Chinese. But you had Soviet jet fighters out there that we had to deal with. So there was some need to get more people ready and trained and out there at that time. Now, did you have a certain sense that what you were doing was important that way, or were you just focusing on the job?
I always felt that it was important that I militarily, and yeah, I think I had a conception of the importance of what I was doing.
Okay. And without getting overly technical, I mean, how did the system work? Did you have things like, you probably don't have radar guidance or anything like that, but I mean, what was involved in that?
It was a radar controlled gun, bomb, rocket sight.
Okay.
That's what we had to teach later on when I was doing other things. That's what we taught, the operation of it to the pilots, and we taught the maintenance of it to the maintenance people and specialists.
Okay. All right. And basically, how long did you spend at Lowry?
11 months.
Okay. So you've got now like a better part of 2 years of training between all of these different places that you've gone to. Okay. And so, but had you signed up for 4 years? Was that the deal?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So they've got 2 years left where they can actually use you for something. But I guess already at Lowry, were you beginning to train people?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So you're doing that job already. So it's not just being trained. Now you're doing the training there.
No, I was actually one of the instructors at school.
And now you stay there for a certain amount of time, but then what do they do with you after that?
Well, it was a kind of a curious thing that happened. I went home on leave to Grand Rapids, and when I got back to Lowry, the school I was teaching in had disbanded while I was gone. So then I had to decide what I should do, and I was interviewed for this mobile training in Chanute Field.
Okay, and
I was accepted for that.
Okay, and then where is Chanute Field?
In Champaign, Illinois.
Okay, so now you go to Illinois, and it's a mobile training unit. And what was the purpose of the unit, basically?
Purpose of the detachments or units, you call. We had special instructors on each of the aspects of the plane. And my job was the gun, bomb, rocket sight, and all the armament on the plane.
Okay. And what range of armament did that plane have, or what could it be equipped with?
It had machine guns and bombs and rockets.
And were the rockets designed for air-to-ground fire or to shoot at other airplanes, or
air-to-ground?
Air-to-ground. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Now, that's a mobile unit. So, did you actually then get assignments to different places and move around?
Oh, yes.
All right.
That was a good aspect of the job, was the fact that we got around to different places.
Okay. Now, do you remember what the first place was that they sent you to from?
I think the first place was Selfridge Air Force Base in Detroit.
Okay. You had to go back to Michigan.
Yeah, that's right. And I probably spent a month or sort of being trained as how to operate in that particular environment. So,
all right. And then from Selfridge, then where do you go? Doesn't have to be in order.
Well, I got back to Chanute Field between assignments.
Okay.
And I had assignments at Alpena with the National Guard, and Oscoda, Michigan, with National Guard, and then I went to George Air Force Base in California, and I guess probably it's getting a little bit hazy, but when I was destined to go overseas, then I went to Tsuiki, Japan.
Okay.
And we had our school set up there.
Okay. Now, what was that experience like?
Well, that was quite interesting because we didn't live in barracks. We lived in a semi-tent. It was canvas roof, but it did have sides. And
Was there like a wood floor to it, or off the ground?
Yes,
And, yeah.
it was off the ground. So it was under a canvas tent, but was almost like a barracks.
Okay. Now, was the Korean War still going on at that time?
Oh, yes.
Okay. All right. And now, were you working with new pilots who've just come over, or our new ground crew, or are these people who had some experience already?
Most of the people that we were instructing were from Korea.
Okay.
They would come to our school in Japan, and we would teach them everything about the F-86. Each of us as instructors would teach about our particular specialty.
Okay. Now, you said from Korea. Were they Americans stationed in Korea, or were they Koreans?
Oh, Americans.
Okay. All right. But weren't we already using the F-86 over there?
No, they were just transitioning from
Okay.
The F-80 to F-86.
All right.
And that was our purpose, to coordinate them with the new plane.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the F-86 was a much better plane in a lot of ways than the F-80
yeah.
was. So
Yeah.
that would make a real difference in terms of what's going on. So, okay, you're in the middle of something kind of important at that point.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, did you have the impression that most of the people you worked with there, they had pretty good skills coming in, or?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they, most of who we taught had been experienced in what was going on with the F-80, but what we were concerned about was getting them acquainted with something different.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
so that's what we did.
Okay. Now, was this armament system that you're using, your specialization, now, was this really new technology to them, and just a different way of doing things?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, they appreciated what we were doing for them.
Okay. Okay. Now, while you're in Japan, now you get to go off base and go.
Oh, yeah.
Look. Okay. So where'd you go? What did you see?
Oh, went to Tokyo, and of course in our particular area, this is the southern island of Japan,
Okay. So
Kyushu Island,
Okay.
and got very well acquainted with the Japanese people. We had maintenance people for the school that were Japanese,
Mm-hmm.
and they would invite us to their house off and on.
Now, when you went over to Japan, what were you expecting it to be like?
Ooh, I really didn't have, I don't recall what I thought at that time about Japan.
Yeah, because you've grown up with World War II going on. The Japanese were the bad guys. And were you expecting, so you might think they might be hostile or whatever. Were you surprised by the kind of reception you got, or just?
I wasn't surprised, but I wasn't just conscious of any particular discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
I just
So
don't
they were
remember
good,
that at least.
So they were good hosts, basically.
Oh, yeah.
We got along with them well. You're on Kyushu. Did you go to Nagasaki?
I think I went to Nagasaki at one time.
Mm-hmm.
They had an Air Force base there.
Yeah.
And I did travel to different bases in Japan because we had detachments and
Mm-hmm.
we had friends and so forth that we associated with, so we'd get to see them once in a while.
Okay. Now, if you're in the Air Force, you just get to go flying around from one base to another?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And about how long did you spend in Japan, do you think?
The first session was 3 months,
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to Okinawa for 3 months.
Okay. And how was Okinawa different from being in Japan?
Well, it was more confined. That's about the only thing I can think about, but it's pretty similar to Japan.
Okay.
Well, in fact, I think it was a part of Japan
Yeah,
at that
yeah.
time. And,
But it's
so I spent 3 months at Okinawa, and then I went back to Japan again for another 3 months.
and did you go to the same base or to a
Yeah.
different one? Okay.
Yeah, same setup.
Okay. And then did you make it to Korea?
We always made it to Korea at least once a month,
Okay.
because if you were in Korea at that time, you did not have to pay income tax.
Oh.
So if we spent 1 day in Korea in a month, why we wouldn't have to pay income tax. And so we made sure that we got over there at least once a month. And of course, we were teaching the people from Japan, from Korea, so
Mhm.
we had an association in that respect. And
Okay. So when you would go over to Korea, did you do any actual work or did you just stay over, look around, socialize, and then go home?
just kind of, yeah, that's about all we did. I don't recall actually doing any instruction work.
Right.
Just
So would you just fly over to an air base and
Yeah.
hang around, then go back?
Yeah, and I had a friend of mine who was a pilot there, so I spent some time with him. And I remember that there was a lot of tension in the barracks with the pilots. And I remember one incident where they heard of an explosion of some sort. And all of the pilots that were in the barracks at that time went out to see once. They were concerned that it might be one of our planes that had gotten exploded or whatever. They were concerned about that. I remember that aspect.
Okay. And did they find out what it was?
I don't recall whether they ever found out what it was, or at least I don't have any recollection of that.
Okay. Now you're talking about the feeling of tension. Was that just the kind of just sort of the worry that, you know, it's sort of a dangerous job that they have,
Oh,
and they
yeah.
go off and they might not come back?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
So it wasn't like they were arguing with each other or anything like that?
No. The tension was that they were worried about their other pilots.
Okay.
Yep.
Now the pilots are officers, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You see, but now was it normal for pilots and enlisted personnel like yourself to be friends or socialize, or?
I don't think that was all normal, but it worked out for me.
Okay. And so how did you get to know the pilot? Was that just working with him in the base before, or?
A friend, he was at Calvin with me.
Oh, okay. So you
Yeah.
had an outside connection.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a little different. All
In
right.
fact, he was a resident with me in our home for a period of time at Calvin.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I knew him pretty well.
All right. Okay. So did you have basically 2 stops in Japan, or did you get back to Japan again, or? So so
Well,
you had 2 stops in Japan, 1 in Okinawa.
and then went back to the States.
Okay. And did you have some time left still on your enlistment when you went back to the States?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right.
And did you go back to Chanute or somewhere else?
Went back to Chanute for reassignment, and I got assigned to Hawaii. And in fact, that was an interesting story too. That they needed a person with my training to teach in Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked forward to that. And then they said, you've got to re-enlist for 2 more years in order to go.
Oh.
And this happened to be in September, which is the beginning of college. I said, well, I'm going to have early, at that time they had early,
Well, the early out, I guess, is what
early
that.
out, we'll
Yeah.
call it, yeah. And you could get out of the Air Force 3 months earlier in order to go to college if you wanted.
Mhm.
So I says, okay, process me for that.
Okay.
And then they couldn't find anybody else but me, so I went to Hawaii and did not have to re-enlist.
Okay. So how long was this? Like 3 months in Hawaii or
Yeah,
something like that?
about 3 months.
Okay. And what was that like?
Well, that was very nice. We were teaching the National Guard, so we got to know the civilian population quite a bit in Hawaii because they were all civilians normally, except they were in the National Guard.
And do you
they would
remember?
invite us into their house and they'd take us on the weekends or whatever,
Yeah.
take us around the island. And
Okay.
we went around the island with different people numbers of times.
Now, were you on Oahu?
Yeah.
Okay. And what Air Force Base were you at?
I think that's called Hickam.
Hickam Field. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
one that got hit. Pearl Harbor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, by the time you're getting to the end of your enlistment now, this is 1954. The Korean War itself is over, and so it's a little bit easier for the Air Force to let go of most personnel, but they still needed you. Aside from that business about, well, you have to sign up for 2 more years, did you get much encouragement to re-enlist?
Oh, yes. They really worked on me.
What did they offer you aside from getting to go to Hawaii?
Don't remember any particular aspect, but I know that they wanted to know why I did not want to
Okay.
re-enlist.
All right. So why didn't you want to re-enlist?
Because I just didn't like the regimentation
Okay.
of that life. And I wanted to get back to school.
Okay. Yeah. So you had what kind of career did you want to go into?
Well, being in the Air Force changed my whole outlook because when I first went to Calvin, I was in education.
Mhm.
And then the electronics that I got in the Air Force, why I decided I'd go into electrical engineering. So I went to the University of Michigan rather than going back to Calvin. I went to the University of Michigan.
Mhm.
And I didn't get a lot of credit for what I had taken at Calvin. So I spent 3.5 years at
Okay.
Michigan. So I had 6.5 years of college before I had my degree.
All right. Now, did the Air Force service time, did that basically pay for the education in Michigan? Okay.
GI Bill.
Yep. All right. And then, did you get married somewhere along the line, or where does that fit into the story?
As soon as I got out of the Air Force in December of 54, in January of 55, we got married.
Okay. Now, did you get it? So did your fiancée going to just stay in Michigan while you were traveling around, or did she ever come out to where you were?
Well, she did visit me one time when I was in Denver.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, we were reminiscing about that just recently, and so yeah, that's about the only association of visiting me.
Right. Now, did you get to go see her when you were stationed at Selfridge, or was that still too far away? Or
Well, we did a lot of things together
mm-hmm.
in that time. And when I was at Chanute, I would often drive to Grand Rapids from Champaign on weekends.
Yeah,
Back
yeah.
and
So,
forth.
so some of those Midwestern assignments, that wasn't such a bad thing.
Yeah,
I mean, being in Biloxi or whatever was a little harder, but
yeah.
okay. And then, did you write to each other regularly when you were farther away?
Yeah, we had quite a stack of letters.
Mm-hmm.
Don't have them anymore, but
Okay. All right. But she was now. At what point had you decided to get married? I mean, was that way back when you were still in college, or was this later on after you were in the Air
No, it
Force?
was later on. It was
Okay.
when I was in the Air Force and our correspondence.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
How that all developed, I don't remember all of the aspects.
Well, we might edit that part out of the interview, but okay. All right. So then you go on and you have a career as an electrical engineer.
Yeah.
Okay. What companies did you work for?
Well, first company I went to was the Martin Company in Baltimore, Maryland. The reason I went there was because they had a plant in Denver, and my experience in Denver was positive,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted to live in Denver.
Okay.
And so I took a job with the Martin Company in Baltimore, hoping that I'd be transferred.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that didn't happen. I didn't get transferred. But I spent 4 years with the Martin Company. And then I had an opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. area, Silver Spring, Maryland, actually, with Vitro Laboratories. And so I felt that I didn't want to go to Denver anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The kids were growing up and didn't want to move. So I spent about 23 years there.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very interesting work also.
Okay. Now, were you working still with aircraft or doing other stuff?
Missiles.
Missiles. Okay.
In fact, what we did in Vitro Laboratories was we were the coordinators of all of the systems for the missile launching on the submarines,
Mm-hmm.
which is very interesting
All right.
work.
Okay.
So we were coordinating all of the different aspects of that system with all of the different manufacturers of the parts of the system. So we were coordinators and got to know a lot about different companies.
Mm-hmm. And did it get to the point where they'd actually take you and onto a submarine or take a look at what they were doing there?
I never really got on a submarine.
Okay.
All that time that I worked, I didn't personally get on a submarine.
All right. So So then, how did you wind up back in Michigan?
Well, we retired after I spent that 20-some years
Right.
in Maryland. Why we had the opportunity to go to Denver.
Mm-hmm.
So I took a job with the same company that I had originally gone to.
Wow.
They were no longer the Martin Company, but they were called Martin Marietta
Right.
at that time, and is now Lockheed Martin.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got to live in Denver like I wanted to in the first place.
Okay. But Denver's still not Michigan. So now you're back in Grand Rapids.
Yeah,
You just
well,
retired here? Or?
We retired in 1992 in Denver.
Mm-hmm.
And I say we because my wife was a cafeteria manager in public schools there. So
Mm-hmm.
we both retired in 1992.
Mm-hmm.
And then we moved in a fifth wheel trailer from our house up to the mountains of west or central Colorado.
Okay.
And then we went back and forth from Denver, Colorado to our home in Breckenridge, Colorado on the fifth wheel trailer
Mm-hmm.
to Arizona, northwest of Phoenix, to another RV park. We did that for a number of years, went back and forth between Colorado and Arizona,
Mm-hmm.
summer, winter type thing. We did that for a number of years, and then we decided that we didn't want to be hauling it ourselves, so we sold our truck and had somebody move us back and forth.
Okay.
We did that for a number of years, and then we decided that, well, I guess we're getting older and we don't want to be much of a burden to our kids, and maybe we ought to decide what we want to do a little bit more permanent. And so we decided that we didn't want our kids to be saddled with the problem of what are we going to do with mom and dad because they can't function.
Right.
Well, that was in 2004, I think it was. And so we decided that we'd stop doing what we were doing and come back to Grand Rapids. Both of our kids live here.
Okay.
And we went to the Holland home right away from there.
Okay. And 11 years later, you're still here and and so forth, and doing well. All right. And I guess to look back then at the time you spent in the service, I mean, normally I ask people, how did it affect you? What did you take out of it? And you mentioned one thing. I mean, you kind of got your career out of the Air Force.
Oh, yeah.
What else did you take out of that experience, or how else did it affect you?
Oh, I'm sure it had an effect, but I don't have any particular recollection of how it actually affected me. I'm sure it had an effect on me, but I don't know what that was.
Well, I don't know. Did you always have a taste for going places and seeing things, or did
Oh,
you?
Yeah. We did a lot of traveling together. In fact, we've been in all 50 states except for North Dakota.
Okay. Not sure how much there is in North Dakota, but all right. Okay. Well, listen, it makes for a good story, so thank you for coming in today and sharing it.
Okay, you're welcome.
All right. And